What's up, robots? So I wanted to sit and talk about the newest class, elementalist, a little bit. And unfortunately, I want to say it sucks. It's pretty much the worst class in the game at the moment. And there's a few outliers why. So a lot of the issue revolves around mantra. The mantra increases the damage of the mantra by 15%, and it rotates through burn, shock and cryo every 10 seconds. That's all fine and dandy. Trinity always works off whatever your mantra is. The fireball one is good, even though the damage on it is lackluster compared to the ability damage of pretty much everything else. The lightning shock feels like it just doesn't ever do anything. It tickles one or two enemies. This can hit a whole room, it'll clear out all the small things, deal a good chunk of damage to the big things. This will hit two enemies and stun them. Same with ice shards, it doesn't feel like 7 seconds cooldown. I never want to cast either of these, I always just want to have fireball. So it always feels bad when you have one of these up and you end up using your Trinity. And then Comet doesn't work off your mantra. Like, if it shoots the same element as your mantra, it still gets the bonus damage. Don't get that info wrong. But what I mean is, it will be random between one of the elements when it shoots. So it deals 45 damage, which is the lowest damage of any of the abilities, even Blaster. And one can only assume, because that damage gets a bit higher if it is the same as the mantra, but it isn't going to be the same as the mantra two-thirds of the time. So that's the base issue with Elementalist, is it's already, the abilities feel a little bit lackluster. Fireball feels amazing. Chain Lightning doesn't feel like it's doing enough. Ice Shards doesn't feel like it's doing enough. And I don't just mean damage, I mean they could offer more utility. Like Ice Shards could crit, maybe. Like you can get hit crit spots with it. Chain Lightning, I think it needs to hit more targets or be something more interesting than shooting out one Chain Lightning. Like it could charge you with shock and then it shocks a few things when you get close to them or something. Because at the moment, Chain Lightning feels the worst. Hits two targets. It's an okay chunk of damage, but like it's 30 damage less than a rocket, which can hit 5 targets if they're all stacked up, or like consistently hits 2 to 3. Most of the others don't have damage dealing, to be fair. So it's difficult to compare, but it just feels a bit lackluster, especially for 7 seconds cooldown. And then we get on to abilities. So you have 4 utility style ability perks within this. Bearing in mind you have, what, 16 abilities? 4, 8, 12, 16. So yeah, you have 16 abilities. So take that into account when we're going through how many of these are actually useful. Okay, so you have utility, attunement. So this changes the effects of your main ability, depending on which one you pick. So your fireball gets bigger. Chain Lightning can hit 1 additional target, which isn't that much. Ice Shards increases damage by 25% and number of shards by 4. So that's pretty good. The Ice Shards one is a good damage bonus. The number of shards by 4 doesn't really matter too much, because you can still only hit a maximum of 5 of your shards. So that just means that you can hit more of a room consistently. The upgrades of it are okay. It means you can turn all of your elements into one specific version. So you could turn all of your Trinity effects into the Fireball, which is the one that is preferable because of how it hits everything. So that's cool, but you have to do a perk and an upgrade just to reach making the ability usable. Not even strong or increasing the damage or anything like that, just so that it functions. And then when Mantra Cycle, increased Trinity damage by 30 seconds for 6 seconds. So you tend to get to use this once every cycle, and it cycles every 10 seconds. So ultimately it's 30% damage increase every 10 seconds for one cast, which is okay, but like most classes will increase 30% damage across the board for equivalent level of an upgrade and a perk. Whereas now you've made your ability bigger, you've made it actually usable, and now you're increasing its damage slightly. But you've had to choose the lowest form of the damage in order to do that, so then you're just making it like almost the same as Rocket. So that's utility, and both the upgrades are basically utility as well, which doesn't make it feel great. Then we have Inner Fire. This grants you 1 additional use of Trinity and reduces its cooldown by 2 seconds. Great perk. So now Trinity is on a 5-second cooldown, you can spam it a bit more. That's kind of cool. Its upgrades, I haven't actually unlocked one there, which is amusing, but its upgrades also means that you can cycle through the abilities, and it's not bad. Like, this is actually a good utility. The problem is, because the Elementalist's core set is so lackluster, this utility would be amazing on any of the other characters, but it just makes the it just makes it usable. It doesn't make it good. You now just have to be cycling Comet and Trinity repeatedly, cycling around, just in order for it to do mediocre damage. It still doesn't actually equate to Ranger level of damage. It doesn't equate to Rocket level of damage. It doesn't equate to a Shorty level of damage. It doesn't equal Dagger damage. It barely equals a Blink build damage. Definitely doesn't equal a Blaster or Deploy drones build. And you have to sync in utility options to make it usable. All the others are usable already off the bat, and all the perks and stuff like improve them or change them. This just makes it usable. And then the last one we want to talk about is Infused Weapon. Infused Weapon is probably one of the better perks the Elementalist gets. And the main issue with it is you're going to want to pick it as your core pick, one of your first options. And off the bat, it doesn't actually really... Well, it makes your weapon deal bonus damage, and the perk itself doesn't give any... It makes your weapon deal the same damage as your mantra. So it'll add burn, shock or cryo to your weapon, which is amazing. And then because of your passive, you get 15% bonus damage with those shots. So this perk is stronger than it looks at base value. And then it has 2 absolutely incredible upgrades. It has infinite ammo and 30% fire rate for 1.5 seconds on Mantra Cycle. And it has gives you bolts, which are the old sparks. So it generates 10 of them, and you fire homing projectiles, which start off at a base value of 9 bonus damage. So that's 90 bonus damage across all 10 shots, which is more damage than you get from your ability. The only issue with that is base off mantra cycle time is 10 seconds. Okay, so that's the utility ones. Now, if we look at the ability perks that offer damage, we have Robo Wizard. This is actually fairly nice. It increases your damage every time you hit something with Trinity or Comet. Each point will increase your damage by 20%, and those last for 6 seconds. Now with an upgrade you can increase the number of stacks, so you can get up to 100% bonus damage on your abilities, and the stacks will last for 10 seconds, which is really nice. You also then have, when mantra cycles, it instantly recovers comet cooldown. All really good. But again, the problem with this, for Robo Wizard to function and feel good, you basically have to have inner fire, so that your cooldowns are low enough so that you can stack it. So instantly you have to be using a utility slot in order for one perk to function, which is fine because that's how builds work, right? But the problem is you kind of then also need attunement if you want Trinity to ever be good, because you're gonna either want to be maxing damage against single targets, which is ice shards, or you're gonna want to be maxing AoE clear, which is fireball. So then you've already used 2 utility slots in order for your abilities to function, for you to then want to build the damage parts. Which again, it's a shame that you have to use up so much space and so much time in your run just making these function. But so this is fine, and it's standard. Critical burst, this is similar to a lot of other perks on the other classes. It's absolutely fine. Gives you increased critical chance, which is amazing. Gives you more CDR when you crit for your Trinity or your Comet, and vice versa, depending on which one crits. Again, that's great. It means you can be cycling. So these 3 perks you can probably get away with, so maybe you don't need that, but then you're putting in an additional upgrades in order for a lot of utility. So the main issue here, on paper it all looks good, but the problem is the base damages are so low that you need 6 perk slots in order for it to become good, because you need the utility to make it spammable, and then you need the perks to actually bring it up to a similar level. Like, this isn't even bringing it to a good level damage. You need these perks to bring it to a similar level of damage as the other characters have base. And then we have Meteor, which increases your, when using Trinity, increases your comet damage by a large percent and increases its size. Then you have more damage if you're hitting a single, and Mantra Cycle triggers Meteor. Again, on its own, that doesn't look too bad. It's similar to an upgrade. Yes, an upgrade, not an additional perk, just an upgrade that NG can get hold of. For some reason I can't actually see it. There it is, Big Ball. So Cryo Blaster, Big Ball. So what we get as a perk, Engineer gets up as an upgrade. Warning Blast is more of a weapon than an actual use for your main thing. We then also have Power Infusion, which will increase your damage of your mantra by an additional 15. So if you match your mantra and your elemental damage, you're going to 30% rather than 15%. Bearing in mind, base upgrade up here, Overpower, does the same thing, except it's an upgrade on its own. Yeah, and then we add bonus damage equals half if it's an element that is opposite to it. Now, I haven't fully tested this. I'll probably fully test it and I'll have a pop-up afterwards if I am wrong in saying this. But information I have been fed is that if your weapon is 2 elements and you shoot, one of those elements matches your mantra. So say you are shooting burn and shock and your mantra is currently on shock, you get 15% bonus damage. You will not get the additional for having elemental damage that is offset from that. So you wouldn't end up with 45% bonus damage overall. You'd only end up with the normal 30%. Which kind of makes this whole perk useless. because both of its upgrades means that Trinity and Comet deal an additional random element. There is no point doing an additional random element if those random elements don't really stack up to anything. Yes, you're stacking points towards like more shock or more slow or more burn, but ultimately that doesn't mean much. You're going to get those stacks up anyway, and just doing a little bit additional doesn't help. So both of those upgrades are okay if both of those upgrades were one upgrade. Like, both of those need to be combined into one, because otherwise it's completely wasted. You end up having to spend 3 levels worth of stuff into a perk that should really be at most 2 levels worth. And then this is the problem with the elementalist, is level economy. Like, everything on paper, one-on-one, looks fine, but its level economy is so bad. Elemental Resonance is the only reason that you would ever want Power Infusion, Trinity and Comet. And this increases your damage by 20% for each element to effect they are affected by. Bearing in mind, Shock doesn't count as being in effect until they are stunned, so you have to build that up first. So it isn't a constant 60% damage bonus, it's a 40% damage bonus. This is probably the Elementalist's strongest perk, in my opinion. It then increases auto crit chance of elemental damage by 10%, and takedowns have a chance of triggering explosion, which is all fine and dandy. Gun Diet is Gun Diet, it's fine, it's copied from, it's in other gear, it is what it is. Elemental Mastery options are really good, just not on Elementalist, because he deals too much wide variety and he doesn't have the levels to spare to put into Mastery, just to get bonus damage with one element when he's already doing multiple elements all over the place. He doesn't stick doing one element enough for any of these masteries to ever really be relevant. But we're deviating from ability perks. So in order for your ability to do good damage, you need 3 ability perks, 2 utility perks, and for it to actually function really nicely, you actually need 3 utility perks. So assume Attunement is just a nice addition, right? So we'll ignore that. The problem is the term when mantra cycles. Yeah, so we've got 2 things here that when mantra cycles, and that's a 10-second cooldown. Everything else is cooling down these 2 abilities, but mantra is staying here. Now there is one really good perk here, Dynamic Mantra. Now Dynamic Mantra I think is actually potentially the biggest flaw in the Elementalist, because it feels like a lot of it is kind of balanced around the fact that you could just pick up Dynamic Mantra. So Dynamic Mantra increases your mantra damage by 5%, which is abysmal. That's nothing. It reduces the cycle duration of your mantra by 40%, which without any other perks is useless. This is the most useless perk in the game on its own, and then is also at the same time the most relevant perk that the Elementalist has, because it synergizes with most of his kit, and it needs, not only does it synergize, but those bits of kit only really function well if you have Dynamic Mantra. So it reduces your mantra cooldown to 6 seconds instead of 10 seconds. You can then further reduce that by another 20%, so it goes down to 4 seconds instead of 10 seconds. And then you have one which is Chromatic Infinity, which lets you stay on a specific mantra for longer. Now for 99% of cases, you are never going to pick up Chromatic Affinity. And for almost every other case, in like 90% of the builds that I've looked at on Elementalist, it is just better if you have Dynamic Mantra. And the problem with that is, for Dynamic Mantra to function, A, it can't be your first perk, even though it's the most important perk, because it's useless on its own. B, it needs both a perk and an upgrade, so this takes up 2 level slots. It takes up a perk slot that could be giving you other bonuses that are actually useful on their own, but this isn't a perk that's ever useful on its own. and it bloats out your upgrades because you're pretty much never going to want to take chromatic affinity. But in instances where your mantra recycles instantly, you're now taking a 7-second cooldown Trinity to a 4-second mantra cooldown. So then you don't even need stuff like Inner Fire, but it still just functions better if you do have Inner Fire, because what you've got to bear in mind is mantra is constantly clicking down. So even if you have a 3-second Trinity cooldown and a 4-second mantra cooldown, if they're not synced up, you end up with, you cast Trinity, mantra had 2 seconds left, so now you have Trinity again in 2 seconds rather than 4 seconds, and then so it's just quicker. Critical Burst luckily doesn't scale off it, but it's the same with Meteor Forward. When mantra cycles trigger Meteor, so you can get Comet multiple times within a small amount of time because of the mantra triggering. Then we've also got, if you did take attunement, when mantra cycles increase Trinity damage by 30% for 6 seconds. With Dynamic Mantra, you can now keep attunement up 24/7. So you now make this perk that was before good. This becomes better. This becomes better. Power Infusion is never amazing. Even Unstable Armor, which is actually quite bad, but good if, like, on paper, Unstable Armor kind of bad. It gives you 24% armor for 1 hit. You trigger an explosion that deals almost as much damage as your Comet and your Fireball Trinity, which is quite big for Elementalist. But the big kicker is, when mantra cycles, it triggers Unstoppable Armor Explosion. That's every 10 seconds, unless you have Dynamic Mantra, so now it's every 4 seconds. So if you're doing a build where you want to run Unstable Armor, it's basically useless unless you also run Dynamic Mantra. So normally in my build videos, I say you make a build and you pick 3 perks that are your core, because it's fairly consistent to get 3 perks. And then your 4th one would be a dead perk. It's you make do with what you get. With Elementalist, you need 6 perks to make your build work, and you're not going to get 6 perks, you can only get 4. And Dynamic Mantra has to be one of them. So now you're working with 3 perks, but you are the same power as if you didn't have any perks until you have those 3 perks. It's so painful. And all the perks that work with Dynamic Mantra need an upgrade as well, before the mantra bit kicks in. So Sticky Bombs, again, have an upgrade where it cycles with mantra. Now this one's actually less important, because if you tend to be able to keep Sticky Bombs up without mantra cycling, but mantra cycling just makes it more usable. It's always up rather than you can keep it up. Radiance doesn't really have any effect with it. But Infused Weapon does. Like, Infused Weapon becomes the best perk in the game if you have Dynamic Mantra, because you reload on mantra and you gain sparks on mantra. Now bear in mind, if you have a gun, normally, right, if you have a gun that shoots more than 10 shots in 10 seconds, which is most guns in the game, you will run out of sparks before you get more sparks. So the sparks goes from just like a little bit of damage to really good damage. If you have Dynamic Mantra, it's now 4 seconds until you get 10 shards back, or 10 bolts back. And there's a lot of guns that can utilize that. Like, if you're shooting 10 shots in a second, then you run out of sparks really quickly. But if you're using a bit of a slower fire rate, you can consistently have these extra shards dealing bonus damage. And it actually makes a huge difference. So once again, if you want to be running Infused Weapon, you basically have to be running Dynamic Mantra to get like an actual strong synergy out of it. You have to run dynamic mantra if you want to run unstable armor. Power infusion needs another upgrade. Critical burst is okay. Robo Wizard is fine, but it's still stronger if you have dynamic mantra, but there aren't enough perks if you're running an ability elementalist to be able to fit it in. Inner Fire is a very good utility perk, but your base abilities don't have enough damage to ever actually want to take it. Attunement means that you actually get to use your abilities that are good. Like, it's such a shame that all the perks are just a little bit lacking, or the upgrades are just a little bit lacking. Like, it feels like it's missed the mark on more than half of its kit, which is a real shame to say, because on paper it looks like it should be good, but it doesn't synergize well. We need dynamic mantra not to exist. It needs to be balanced less around mantra refreshing and the fact that dynamic mantra exists, or you need to take out quick spell, because quick spell sucks. So take in the quick loop, take out quick loop from dynamic mantra, replace it with quick spell. You can get quick loop twice, then you can balance it more around mantra refreshing. And it needs balancing around assuming that you don't have elemental items, because I think that's the biggest reason why all of these numbers are so low, is because there are so many good elemental items in the game that if you got every single one of them, elementalist would probably be the most broken thing in the world. But the chance of you getting every single elemental item in order just to make the elementalist work is so low that balancing around it isn't a great idea. Now, there are gun builds that work really well with them, like elemental resonance and infused weapon. Really, really good. You then have to spare some space for dynamic mantra so that the reload and stuff is staying up. Then you can throw sticky bomb in, but sticky bomb is a little bit weaker without baby boom, but you can't fit that in because you need dynamic mantra. Radiance, unstable armor, you're pretty much never going to build around. You need too many perks in order to make the abilities work, because the abilities are all base too low. Power infuse gives you 2 dead upgrades every level up that just take up space where you want to be trying to grab other upgrades, because you don't take this in an ability build, so the Trinity and Comet infusion are pointless for like 90% of your builds. Warning blast is fine, like that's in a completely fine place. It's kind of annoying me that I don't have the other upgrade for inner fire. I can't remember what it is either, but inner fire is not bad. Robo Wizard and critical burst, they're like, these 3 are all fine. The problem is you need 5 perks before the elementalist's abilities start feeling anywhere near as good as any of the other characters. And no, that doesn't mean all the other characters need nerfing. They're all fine. Dynamic mantra needs removing, and we just need it as base upgrades, and then something else interesting putting in. Sticky bombs are fine, except they take too long to explode in my opinion, but they'd be broken if they didn't. The masteries thing is a dead space. Now, bearing in mind that you have 16 perks, and in my opinion 4 of them are worth taking. And gun diet is worth taking and is good, but you kind of have no reason to take gun diet if you've got infused weapons and dynamic mantra. But at the same time, you have no real reason to take infused weapons if you don't plan on taking dynamic mantra, because otherwise mantra rate is too low. Honestly, I feel like mantra needs to be base 4 seconds, and then you need dynamic mantra to be your option if you want to specialize. So then you can have dynamic mantra, mastery, infused weapon builds where you stick on one burn thing for 15 seconds and the other for 2 seconds. It should be the other way around. We need low mantra cooldown and then the ability to build on it, rather than high mantra cooldown and the ability to change it. Elementalist is meant to be the master of all elements, so we need to be cycling through all elements quickly. And then it would be a lot more interesting. At the moment, the level requirements to reach good builds is too high. The amount of mental power it takes to cycle everything properly is too high for the reward that you get. And the actual number of usable perks feels like it's too low, unfortunately. Which is a shame, because as I say, all of these are quite nice and creative options. But it's just the upgrades miss the mark, or the base numbers miss the mark, or it relies too much. Like, it relies too much on synergy. All the other characters, you have synergy, but you don't have to synergize 100%. Where Elementalist feels like you have to synergize and you need more perks than you're able to get access to in order to reach that synergy. So it's a shame to say, but I think a few of us agree that Elementalist is probably the weakest character in the game. It has a very strong gun build. Is that strong build the strongest? No, because Commando does it better. Like, Commando does the same build that Elementalist does, except it does it better. You've got marking, you've got the reload, you've got the additional shots, but you keep these for longer and they do higher damage. Like, the Commando is just... The Elementalist is trying to do a Commando build and failing. And then its ability builds do less damage than Ranger, Commando or Engineer. Its close quarters, like AoE builds, is actually weaker than a Guardian close quarter AoE build. And that's the other thing. Radiance here deals AoE elemental damage to things that are within 6 meters of you. And then the Amplify version increases Trinity and Comet damage by 40%. Which is the weakest close combat perk of all the characters. And that's including Green Beret, which gives you impact damage which does nothing to Goliaths or bosses. So Green Beret, 7.5 meters rather than 6 meters. Gives you weapon damage, bonus armor when you're close to things, and I think it increases your bash damage or something as well, I can't remember. Point Blank, 7.5 meters rather than 6 meters. Increases weapon damage and shorty damage as base, and then makes your shorty even more damage at close. Rangers, weapon damage and javelin damage as base. Increases javelin damage by more, and again 7.5 meters, not 6. Recons, 7.5 meters as standard. Weapon damage and dagger damage increase, with a dagger bonus, or, well, a cooldown bonus, so slightly different. Even the Engineers increases the damage of shock. 0.5 shock damage in an AoE around you. Obviously it depends which element, but I'm just going off shock because that's one that I've unlocked. And then the upgrade is weapon damage plus 25%. So 40%, yeah, it's a lot of bonus damage to Trinity and Comet. But as I've said before, Trinity and Comet are already so low on their base damages that this doesn't mean anything. And you wouldn't want to use a Trinity build at 6 meters. Or a Comet build. Like, neither of them, are, other than the Ice Shards, I guess, are that close range. So, I don't know. I feel like it misses the mark. Let me know what you guys think. And this isn't to slate the devs. I love the devs. The devs are awesome. I think, unfortunately, this has just missed the mark. I think I think there were too many things to take into account when trying to balance Elementalist. And don't get me wrong, it's really, really hard to balance games. And even more so when you're taking into account all the elemental damage bonuses, different weapons and how much damage they would be doing with each element on top of each perk. But you've got to keep in mind that you only have 4 perks to play with, and some of the upgrades are just too lackluster, and some of the perks at base feel like it should just be an upgrade. I'm looking at you, Dynamic Mantra. So yeah, it's a sorry state. If you enjoy Elementalist, enjoy Elementalist. I'm not saying you can't win G4 with Elementalist. You can 100%. It can even do it very, very quickly. The problem is it just misses the mark on being a fun character which you can build in multiple different ways. It ends up being a character that has one build that you cannot deviate from on any of the perks, otherwise it doesn't work. The amount of RNG involved in getting Elementalist to perform even half as well as the next weakest thing, which in my opinion is Guardian, is ridiculous. But anyway, I'm sure you guys have enjoyed my 35-minute rant. Let me know what you think below. If you think that I'm completely out of order, go for it, I don't mind. Again, this isn't to slate the devs. If the devs watch this, I hope that rather than feeling dismayed that they didn't hit the mark, they just take it into account when it comes to time to balance things, and just be a bit aware of what the Elementalist might need, from my opinion. Obviously, I'm no ruling. I'm just a player. Yes, I've got a lot of hours in the game, but it doesn't mean that Elementalist playstyle fits with me. So it could be that I'm missing something. But from the people I've spoken to, from the numbers that we've gone over, from the perk discussions, it is just slightly misses the mark. But it shouldn't take much to make it hit the mark either. So kudos to the devs for a wonderful game. I'm sorry that I have to make a negative review for the Elementalist, but it had to be said and it had to be put out there. Have your discussions below on what you feel the Elementalist is lacking or needs, or if it's completely fine. Alright, cheers guys, bye.